And I said, I've got to go back to square one. All these people I dismissed, all these people who say the universe is made of levels, who say there are disincarnate intelligences, who say that death is not simply the yawning grave. I had dismissed all those people as crybabies and sob sisters, and I said, no, the point of view that I previously dismissed is apparently what's actually happening. So in a single experience, I was converted from naive rationalism, realism, reductionism, to my present position, whatever it is. Really, all I've done is worked out the implications of the personal implications for me of the DMT flash, and I've also tried to create linguistic models of it. So the worth of it is that it shows you beyond a shadow of a doubt that the world is made of magic. That's what the world is made of. Not natural law, not interlocking cause and effect, not any of these things that are normally... The world is magic. Not a little bit. 100%. Every atom from one end of this cosmos to the other is magic, magic, magic. Certain concerns just die in the first 30 seconds of the DMT flash and can never be brought back, to my mind. I've seen people who I considered what I call fragile. Some people are not good candidates for the psychedelic experience because they've been damaged by life in some way. And so for them, boundaries shouldn't be dissolved because their whole challenge is to keep boundaries in place. And I remember one case particularly, a woman who was a friend of mine. I really liked her, but I thought of her as fragile and not somebody you wanted to lean on in a crisis. She smoked DMT, thrashed, moaned, rolled her eyes back, gave all the exterior symptoms of really having grabbed on. After about 10 minutes, she sat up and said, "It didn't work. Nothing happened." I said, "Nothing happened. Well, you want to try again?" "No way. Never, ever again." So it did work, but the personality was somehow able to seal itself off from the implications, because the implications quite literally would have destroyed that person. It was a truth they weren't ready for. And I suppose it's wonderful that DMT saves you from that. I felt in danger of dying from astonishment when I did it, and I do every time I do it. I mean, I don't know how they keep the lid on this stuff. I mean, I think that this is the secret that wants to be told. I think that we are, in a sense, here involved in some kind of... I mean, I don't want to lay this trip on too heavy, but in a sense, we're involved in a little cosmic drama here. Fate has chosen you to hear about this. If you've never heard of it before, you're hearing about it now. Now, you don't have to do anything with the fact that you're hearing about it, but you have been told at this point. If you now go forward and live in your, mundane stock portfolio BMW existence, it's because you're making a choice. Because you heard from Terence McKenna that there was an entirely other possibility. You don't have to avail yourself of it. But I think it's a moment of great import in a person's life when they are told about DMT, because it's what everyone thinks is impossible. That's actually what it is.
I have a question. Would that be possible that with DMT, the mind gives away to the inner self, that you are seeing these things with your soul, or that you become your soul in a DMT trip?
Well, what I don't understand is, why are the things you see so alien? I mean, you would think that we have 15,000 years of poetry, painting, song, story. How come there's no tradition of this? How come our folkways and our art and our drama are so utterly empty of an awareness of this? I mean, this is, to my mind, actually probably the central fact of being, or at least it's as important as sexuality. To go from birth to the grave without ever encountering DMT is, to my mind, like going from birth to the grave without ever having a sexual experience. It means you skated through life. You never got it. You never figured out what it was for. And that unnerves me, because I think what life is for is to figure it out. You know, life is some kind of an opportunity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Terence. How and from whom do you buy this stuff?
Well, they haven't made it easy for you. They've made it illegal. So that's really the question, is where do you get it? I can't solve all your problems for you, but that's what you need to know.
Is there any place that is legal? Any country?
Oh, it's legal in most countries. See, there isn't enough of it around. It's never been a social problem. They just made it illegal in the 1960s because they made everything illegal. I mean, if somebody is proposing to the DEA that a drug be made illegal, how do you decide if a drug should be made illegal if you're of their mindset? Well, the first thing you do is you look at emergency room admissions over the past 10 years. You say, well, how many people have been dragged into emergency rooms either raving or dying on this drug? The numbers for DMT, how many people in the past 15 years have been brought to emergency rooms? Zero. Nobody. Because it doesn't last long enough. With our healthcare delivery system, it could last an hour and there would still be no... you'd have to take it in the emergency room, and then they'd have to run to keep the emergency alive long enough for anybody to look at it.
Terence, have you noticed?
Is there any difference between whether you get 1 or 3 tokes as far as dosage?
Yes, there's something, you have to learn how much you need, because some people are very sensitive and some people are incredibly insensitive. And that's why I took the time to describe this feeling of the air being pumped out of the room and then the appearance of this flower-like mandala. If the flower-like mandala persists for longer than 30 seconds or a minute, you're not going to break through. You need to sit up and ask for another toke. And I tell people, when I turn people on to it, whenever I'm in some country where it's legal, I always say to them, at the 30-second mark, I will say, do you want another hit? If you don't say anything, you don't have to do anything. If you do, you must sit up on your own power. If you can't sit up, it's my judgment that you're too loaded to take another hit. So it's tricky to lead people into that.
What's the history of this? How long has it been around?
Well, that's an interesting question, because as a plant hallucinogen, DMT has been around a long time, but in the Amazon as a snuff, and it's what gives the visions to ayahuasca. You see, ayahuasca is a combinatory drug. It's 2 plants mixed together. One inhibits an enzyme system in the body called the monoamine oxidase system, whose job is to deactivate monoamines, of which all these drugs we're talking about are. And the other chemical in ayahuasca is DMT. So what these shaman in the Amazon are really doing is they are inhibiting the monoamine oxidase system, and that allows the DMT to be orally active. You see, if you were to just have some DMT and decide that rather than smoke it, you're going to take it orally, nothing will happen. It will be destroyed in your gut by this system called the MAO inhibitor, the monoamine oxidase system. But if you inhibit that system, you can make it become orally active. But when it's orally active, it's much more diminished and stretched out. But a very stiff dose of ayahuasca, you can, after about at the hour and 25-minute mark on a very strong dose of ayahuasca, if you're familiar with the territory, you can look around and say, my God, it's building toward being like a DMT flash. It is like a DMT flash, except that it goes on for a lot longer, 20, 30 minutes. I question whether in traditional societies anybody ever really reaches these reality obliterating levels. Among the Yanomamo, they make a snuff out of the seeds of Anadenanthera peregrina. And I've done that snuff, and it's very painful to do because you have to blow a couple of tablespoons of ground toasted material up into your nostrils. You can't self-administer it. You have to have a friend blow the blower, and then you scream, fall back, salivate, and by the time you've gotten your act together, he's got it loaded again for the other nostril. And then if you do that, after about 10 minutes of sitting and shaking your head saying, geez, what have I done? A psychedelic state will creep over you, a trip, but not the DMT flash. So I think it's an interesting question. DMT was characterized and purified only in 1956 by a Czech chemist named Sara. And it may be then that only since 1956 have people been able to access that tremendous flash. I have at times given DMT to well, in one case, a very well-known Tibetan spiritual teacher who shall remain nameless. But what he said after doing it was he said, they're the lesser lights. What he meant was when you enter the bardo, you see, on the first stage of the bardo, you see these so-called lesser lights. If you go beyond the lesser lights, you cut the thread that binds you to the physical body, and you then cannot return. You must head deeper into the death realm. So he said, they're the lesser lights. I've seen it many times. Unusual that it should be caused by a plant, but there you have it. Yeah, Kathleen.
When we were foragers and the DMT was in plants, did that affect our nervous system, or did it have to have the MAO inhibitors?
It has to have the MAO inhibitors to be orally active. Although it's a question, why did we invent smoking in the first place?
I was thinking of it not so much as a hallucinogen, but as a formative thing for the nervous system.
Well, definitely these things must have acted. You see, all these indoles, which we've been talking about, are drugs, but there are other indoles, which are growth hormones, sexual hormones, all kinds of stuff, and a lot of our physical expression has probably been altered by exposure to plants. I mean, our hairlessness. There are many aspects about us that are what is called neoteny. Do you all know what neoteny is? Yeah. It's retention of infantile characteristics into adulthood. And if you look at the ratio, for instance, of our skull size to our body size and compare it to other monkeys, we're like juvenile monkeys, even in the adult form. We appear juvenile in our proportions. Our hairlessness. Other monkeys are born hairless, but then they quickly grow body hair. We don't. We retain the juvenile characteristics. And this is probably, when you encounter it in other animal life, it's always assumed to be a response to mutational pressure. So there may be progressive juvenilization going on in the human species. If sex gets any more dangerous, I think probably it will be eliminated as a method of reproduction, and we'll go to vats. And, this will further exacerbate this tendency toward neoteny. The way in which we permit and encourage a larval relationship to television, and the fact that television, the content of television is so idiotic. They say it's now down to being geared for the average 11-year-old. My 11-year-old is bored to death with TV. So this is a neotenization that is culturally sanctioned. We're accepting a kind of society where millions and millions of people have very simple thoughts and spend all their time in a larval state imbibing manufactured data streams that come to them over the boob tube. This is not a pretty picture, actually. I mean, these people are not entirely human beings. They would, I'm sure, rise in holy wrath if they heard that, but they never will hear it because it's not going to be broadcast on any channel they watch. Yeah.
I'm confused about the Tibetan spiritual leaders thing that he said. Was that DMT?
DMT.
And is it your understanding he saw the DMT elves? Or?
I don't know if he saw the elves. He was of such a stature that I couldn't really hammer at him. He pronounced it the lesser lights, and I bowed my way out of the room. Oh, because these yogas that these Tibetans are into are all designed to familiarize themselves with the after-death state. In one way, in one possibility, like the notion of Tibetan religion is that what life is for is to get ready for dying. And that this getting ready for dying has to do with this metaphor of a vehicle, that you're supposed to build an after-death vehicle so that when you die and put the key in the ignition, it's not going to chug, chug, chug and then turn over and not go, because then you're in real trouble. You want your after-death vehicle to be well-serviced and fully fueled when you need it, because then you're going to drive off into the unknown.
Does that mean that those guys experience the same thing as others experience on DMT?
Well, what is persistently claimed for shamanism, and certainly Tibetan religion has roots deep in Central Asian shamanism, what's claimed for shamanism is that the shaman can travel to the realms of the dead. That the shaman is a superhuman, in a superhuman condition, not entirely alive, not dead, but has physically transformed himself or herself into something, a creature of the interzone. And this is the power of shaman, that they can come and go from the interzone. And how seriously we should take this? Very seriously, because we have no technology for accessing these places. There's a lot of cultural hubris involved in all this. We can't imagine that any other culture is in possession of any information that we don't have a pre-prepared file on. And I think that when you spend time with these shamans and really get into it, you finally realize Western civilization is completely infantile. It's completely hung up on the surface. It is not grounded in the dynamics of nature. We are childish. I have heard it said, I knew a had an Indian friend, and he told me once he was going to return to live in India. I said, my God, you're going back to India. It's such a nightmare. Why? And he said, I know it's a nightmare. I hate everything about it except one thing. And I said, what's that? And he said, people in the West are so simple. I can't stand it. And this is true. I mean, if you don't think so, go buy hash in the markets of Bombay, and you will discover you are such a child. You don't know what's going on. You're so easily manipulated and led, so eager to be friendly. You take everyone at face value. Someone smiles at you, you think they're your friend. The line I love, which you hear occasionally in India and in other third world countries, is, I am your friend. I am not like all the others. Yes, special price. Welcome.
Are you able to formulate questions in this situation? I mean, it sounds like you deduced that they may be souls.
Yeah, I deduced that. No, you can't really ask questions because you can on psilocybin with other psychedelics, but you cannot do that with DMT because they know what they want to talk about. They only want to talk about this one thing, about this language transformation possibility.
That they want you to do.
They want you to do.
That happens for others as well?
Yeah, a number of people have reported it. I, at the risk of repeating myself, there is a metaphor in the natural world which sheds some light on this, which is, you all know that octopi change color. This is well understood. Most people think it's because they can camouflage themselves, and so when they move across the reef, they go orange, red, blue, green, depending on what's behind them. This is not what is happening with octopi color changes. What is happening is that they communicate with each other by changing not only their colors, which they can have a very large repertoire of color changes, traveling dots, blushes, so forth. There are technical terms for all of these, but also because an octopus is a mollusk, it's a very soft-bodied creature. They can fold and unfold various parts of their bodies very rapidly, so they can modulate what you see. So that, for instance, if there's a red spot in the equivalent of their armpit, by raising and lowering an arm very rapidly, they can flash you this red spot. Well, at first pass, you just think, well, isn't that interesting? Octopi communicate by changing their shape and color. But if you go back and analyze it a little more closely, something very profound is happening here. You get to it by analyzing the nature of how we communicate. We communicate with small mouth noises, and we are physiologically set up to produce small mouth noises. The average human being can talk for a couple of hours without showing much sign of fatigue. Those of us who train hard can do it endlessly. And what's happening with small mouth noise communication is an acoustical wave is moving through space. It's been formed by the sender based on consulting of an internal dictionary. And then I see the word for could you please help me? The words are, could you please help me? So they say, could you please help me? And then the acoustical wave goes across space, enters the ear of the intended object of the communication. They look in their dictionary and they say, oh, he's asking for assistance. Could you please help me means, can I have assistance? But now, what if the utterance is extremely complex? Then the object of this intended communication looks in their dictionary and they say, well, he either means that he would like to have an affair with me, or he means he would like the name of my tailor, or he means that his clothes cost more. And, there's ambiguity in all of this. And one thing we avoid doing very much in ordinary speech is saying to somebody, what do you exactly mean? Because we fake it. I mean, a lot of communication is, and you say, well, I don't know exactly. He said, I don't know, something. He wants something. What's happening with the cephalopods, the squids and the octopi, is there is no ambiguity. The surface of the octopus's body is the surface of the octopus's mind. The mind changes and controls the appearance of the body. There's no culturally sanctioned dictionary. One octopus can tell what another means by looking. And the meaning is biologically and genetically scripted, not culturally scripted. An octopus from thousands of miles away from where another octopus originated, if they are the same species, can understand instantly what is intended. So in a way, the octopus has involved a very complex linguistic system where the surface of the creature is its mind. Yeah.
You know the book by John Steinbeck, Sweet Thursday?
Mm-mm.
You should read that book. The main character, Doc, has a laboratory where he studies octopus, and he studies them in order to see if he can induce apoplexy.
Apoplexy and cephalopoidia. Sounds good. There are to show you how important this kind of communication is to octopi. The octopi evolved in the intertidal or in the circulittoral zone, meaning in shallow waters off of continents, in reef environments. But, there's a lot of life in reef environments. It's as intense as a rainforest. So there's a lot of evolutionary pressure on a reef environment. And one strategy, if you're under a lot of evolutionary pressure, is to just go somewhere else. Go where there isn't pressure. And where there isn't pressure, competition for food and stuff like that in the oceans is in the benthic, what's called the benthic depths, the abysses of the oceans. And many species of octopi have evolved into the abyssal environments, and they have retained their ability to communicate with each other in these zones of utter darkness by evolving phosphorescent organs that stud their bodies. So there are even octopi which have eyelid-like membranes over little lights that they can turn on and off at will, and then they can flutter these eyelid-like membranes. And if you can ever see film of this taken through the windows of bathyscaphs and other deep ocean exploration vessels, it's pure idea. The animal has disappeared. The animal has become its language. They never see anything of each other but their language. The body and the language have become the same thing. And I think that this is what we are being pointed toward. This is what those elves in hyperspace are trying to push us toward. Remember how I said they sing objects into existence, and the objects themselves then become kind of autonomous entities capable of singing other objects into existence. It's that in order to get the ambiguity out of language, we are going to have to go to a wider bandwidth. And the wider bandwidth is visual. it's incredible that this world of, nuclear powers and integrated global economies and so forth and so on is held together by small mouth noises, is held together by a method of communication, 90% of which is lost in noise and ambiguity. We barely can communicate with each other, and yet we have seized the tiller of planetary existence and propose to set the agenda for every life form on this planet, from virus to grizzly bear. Part of our problem with managing our situation is that we don't have a way of getting ambiguity out of our languages.
Why is that a problem?
Because you can misuse ambiguity. George Bush can tell us that he is the environmental president, that he wants a kinder, gentler America, that he feels the pain. I mean, that you would call this horseshit if it weren't so pathetic. Somebody once said language was invented to lie. Small mouth noise language was certainly invented to lie, because it doesn't existentially map back onto the surface of appearances. This whole fantasy or hope of telepathy lies behind a lot of psychedelic imagery. Well, telepathy, when most people think about telepathy, they think of that they will be able to hear what you think. If they could hear what you think, then there wouldn't be ambiguity. But in fact, there would be as much ambiguity as there is in spoken language, because people speak as much crap to themselves as they do to other people. The only way you can transcend the ambiguity of language is if you turn it into something beheld. And I think that culture is the program within the monkey species that is an attempt to make language visible. And that's why virtual reality, which we haven't talked about too much, but which somebody mentioned as we went around last night, virtual reality holds great promise, because at the operational level, what virtual reality is it's a way of showing somebody the inside of your mind, showing somebody. And notice that when we talk about language, our notions of clarity, there it is, our notions of clear speaking are all visual metaphors. If you think you really understand somebody, then you say, I see what you mean. Or you say, you're completely transparent to me. If somebody is eloquent, you say, he spoke clearly. She painted a picture. What this means is that we have an unconscious bias in favor of the visual sense. It's what our eyes tell us.